Good morning, everyone, and warm welcome to the University of East London. This event is hosted by the Center for Islamic Finance, Law and Communities, and this is chaired by Professor Siraj. A slight delays for our start because we have to make sure we can fix everything because this is really important. And I can tell you now, there are people across the whole world, particularly developing countries, are watching and they would like to watch, and then they can ask questions. I'm Allam Ahmed, and I'm very pleased to be here. We are working, or we have been working quite closely with the Center for Islamic Finance, Law and Communities for a long time. Recently, this workshop is, as you can see here, is a follow-up from what we have done last month with the University of East London and the United Nations. And this project is led by Professor Siraj. He will talk about it later. It's led by the university here. It's quite important. The center is very keen on women empowerment and youth engagement and human rights. And this is not the first one. I think in the room upstairs last year we have celebrated the Women International Day with lots of speakers from Nigeria, from Bahrain, from Korea, from United Arab Emirates, plus our women here. So we have been engaged in this for a long, long time. And coincidentally, I don't know, there are more people as are coming, but not all of the audience are women, which is great really to see dominance of women here. But I think we are waiting for other people. We need to start because, as I said, we have just a couple of things. I don't think there is any alarm expected to be tested today, Siraj, right? No. Today. So if there's any, I hope not, but if there's any fire alarm, the assembly point is outside. You know where you came at the entrance? That's the assembly point. Toilets are on the left-hand side from here. You just go out and then you turn right. You turn left, both men and women. We will have a coffee break. We will try to make sure we can fit that quickly within this delayed half an hour. As I said, the center has been very keen on women issues, not just human rights, but all other issues, empowerment. And I will not talk too much about this because Siraj will do that. Our program will have 4 speakers, and we are very, very pleased and we are delighted to have this wonderful 3 keynote speakers. They're going to talk to us. They bring with them different perspectives. I am very, very grateful for your time, Professor Farida, Dr. Hala, and also we're going to join by Isra very shortly. I'm sure she's somewhere now here. They will bring different perspectives to the topics, and everything we do, it will be uploaded in terms of the videos or in terms of the PowerPoints. It's all online, and I can show you this later. So I would like to introduce Professor Siraj just to give a brief introduction about this workshop and the research project itself.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the University of East London, and also it's our privilege to have you over here. And this, as Professor Allam has pointed out, is an event that's organized by a host of agencies and centers, including the Center for Islamic Finance, Law and Communities, which is an interdisciplinary, intersectoral approach to empowerment, to governance, financial inclusions. So as the term indicates, we are not merely about finance and access to finance or inclusion and governance, but also about legal empowerment, legal pluralism, and finally it is about communities. So today's event particularly is on human rights-based approaches to women's transformation, change, and leadership. And this arises out of a small grant that we have from GCRF, the Global Challenge Research Fund, which is specifically looking at strategies and innovations that can be adopted on the ground by women and men, supporting women's leadership in bringing about change. Specifically, it's about socioeconomic rights, and particularly it's about women's property and land rights. So today our objectives over here are that we want to share through our speakers what are women's experiences, what is the agency, what are the challenges and obstacles and how they overcome it, and what are the choices and responses they come up with. So this is actually led by women, and as I will point out in just a moment, this is one of the series of dozens of events that we have organized, and this was a huge opportunity because of our speakers coming in and connecting with all of you and the communities to strategize, to brainstorm and think of ways of moving forward, but doing so in some ways systematically. So we will discuss in our second part a little bit about what are human rights? Now we all know what human rights are, but it might be just useful for us to have a quick look at how this really works. But what is introduced for many of you is the whole concept of human rights-based approaches, which is not just human rights. When we speak about human rights, we say these are my human rights in some sort of declaratory fashion, or attributing to the sources of those claims or rights. But today we're going to talk about human rights-based approaches, which is to be used in projects, in programming, in all activities. So again, we will look at the potential, the limitations, but more importantly, practical ways of moving forward. So program today, as Professor Allam has said, I'm really grateful for the fantastic support and really commitment that the World Association for Sustainable Development has towards women's rights, towards youth rights, but generally to sustainable development. So after my introduction, I'm going to be looking forward to Dr. Hala, Professor Farida, and Esra to be speaking and setting really the context and sort of teasing out some of the issues, challenges, and approaches, both substantive and in terms of strategic, that women have been taking. So these are some of the best practices that we'll use. The second session, which is going to be from 11:30 to 12, is going to be more of a knowledge exchange. It's going to be more of a substantive session. So there'll be a presentation which will really be on how we can understand and adopt human rights-based approaches, and this will be more in a practical sense. And then we'll have a bit of a group work which will look at practical ways, and we are such a strong, cohesive group that we look at some of the case studies that are available over there. And then we'll be closing for lunch, and lunch has been arranged at a restaurant which is close by, so you'll have a chance to walk through this exciting place, and we'll have lunch together. Look forward to that. So that's a program, and I was just emphasizing a few minutes ago that this is part of a series of events that University of East London, CIFLAC, and sometimes with the WASAD, World Association for Sustainable Development, have organized. So the core part of this training is to work with women leaders in 3 select countries, in Kenya, in India, and in Malaysia. We had, as Professor Allam pointed out, a very successful, very well attended roundtable on human rights-based approaches and women's and youth rights just last month. Also at UN Habitat Assembly, there was a special side event that was organized by University of East London through this GCRF funding. We've organized at the World Bank Masterclass, at the Arab Land Conference, at the African Union meetings, at the World Urban Forum in Malaysia, and also in specific countries such as in Saudi Arabia or Indonesia. And we've also carried out training for UN officials and civil society. And so there's a long list, and I'd like you to add to this richness of what has happened. This is just a quick indication for some of you who are not there at the roundtable, which was organized by WASAD with all of us partners. We had some very powerful speakers, and we have today also. And really, just to recap before we start off, because even though we're going to hear reflections on the whole idea of women's rights in a moment, what we mean by human rights is something that all of us identify with. We talk about the nature of human rights being universal and inalienable, that it cannot be divisible, that they're all connected to each other, they're all interdependent. But most importantly, we will pull out of that equality and non-discrimination. So as far as gender issues are concerned, gender equality issues are tremendously important. Participation and inclusion. So finally, as we will see today in our discussions, that we can't move forward, we can't really achieve any of the sustainable development goals without women's leadership, her voices, her choices, and ultimately leadership. So that inclusion is important, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of bringing communities, families, and all vulnerable communities together. But we cannot have that unless it's enshrined in law, but accountable. So what are the consequences of a society, not just backwardness when they don't recognize the sterling role of women, but equally, how do we monitor and deliver on that progress that we're making in terms of women's equality? Now, many of you know what the panel principles are: participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, and ultimately being encoded in human rights and law. We'll talk about that a little bit. But I just thought when we have Farida on the panel over here, that when you talk about healthcare, for example, you use what is called the Farida, emerging from the principles in healthcare. So again, what is it? I mean, we can encapsulate human rights in so many different obvious commonsensical ways, because that's a consensus within the world community. So it's about fairness, it's about respect, it's about equality, it's about dignity, it's autonomy. So irrespective of whether you're a lawyer or you have some other disciplinary or professional background, you know that these are basic standards and consensus in the civilization that we have progressed, that everybody's entitled to, and certainly women. So in simple terms, I'm just going to use 2 quick slides to set the tone for today's discussion. The first happens to be, it's about human rights, empowerment, development for all, but that will only happen when we are clear that everybody is entitled to as a matter of rights, including women, first and foremost women, I think. And that can only happen when they're corresponding duty bearers, like the state, that has those responsibilities to respect, protect, and fulfill rights. So a normative value, conceptual, an instrumental value in how we will deliver, and most importantly, in terms of mainstreaming gender within institutions. And I don't mean just physical institutions, I'm talking about processes and practices that we all do. And finally, I'll leave you with a thought that we're not talking about some ad hoc references to human rights as a great idea. We're going to talk about how it is possible for us, for example, in the context of land and property rights, how we can use human rights-based approaches in every stage of our programming, for example, as far as SDG is concerned. Our analysis, our planning, our implementation, and our monitoring and evaluation. Only then can we make tangible progress moving forward. So I therefore request our next speakers to come forward in order that we may understand how exactly these ideas and strategies are relevant in a specific real lived context.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.